She was 17 when the world decided it had no place left for her. The argument had been building for months, quiet at first, then sharp, then unbearable. Words were thrown that could never be taken back, and by the time the door slammed behind her, the sky was already dimming into evening. She carried nothing but a small backpack, a bottle half full of water, and a stubborn refusal to turn around. At first, the road felt endless, stretching forward with no promise except distance from what she had lost. But as night crept in and the air turned cold, even that stubbornness began to feel thin. The hills outside town were never meant to be a destination. They were the kind of place people passed by without noticing, dry grass brushing against the wind, scattered rocks catching the fading light. But when you have nowhere else to go, even forgotten places begin to feel like refuge. She climbed slowly, her legs aching, her thoughts louder than the silence around her. Fear crept in, not all at once, but in pieces. The realization of how alone she was, how unprepared, how quickly the world could turn harsh. By the second day, hunger became more than a discomfort. It sharpened her senses, made every sound seem important, every shadow suspicious. She searched for anything, berries, roots, something edible, but found little she trusted. The nights were worse. The cold pressed in from all sides, and sleep came only in short, uneasy bursts. Still, she kept moving, driven by something she couldn't name, something deeper than fear. It was on the third afternoon, when her strength was nearly gone, that she noticed the door. It didn't belong there. Set into the side of a rocky slope, half hidden by tangled vines and dust, it looked like a secret that had been forgotten by time. At first she thought she was imagining it, a trick of exhaustion. But as she got closer, the details became clear. The rough wood, the iron handle, the faint outline where it met the stone. She hesitated. Every instinct warned her that unknown things carried risks. But hunger has a way of silencing hesitation. Slowly she reached out and pulled the handle. It resisted at first, then gave with a low creak that echoed into the quiet hills. Inside, the air was cool and still. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust, but as they did, shapes began to form. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, sacks, and neatly stored supplies. It was like stepping into another world, one untouched by the chaos she had just escaped. There were preserved fruits, grains, dried meats, enough to last far longer than she dared to hope. For a long time, she just stood there, unable to move, as if the moment might vanish if she disturbed it. Then the reality sank in, and with trembling hands, she reached for the nearest jar. The first bite felt unreal, like something she was not meant to have. But as the warmth spread through her, it became something else. Relief, gratitude, disbelief, all tangled together. Days turned into weeks, and the sealed door became her shelter, her lifeline. She learned to ration, to take only what she needed, to respect whatever mystery had placed that hidden store in her path. Outside, the hills continued to shift with the seasons, but inside, there was a sense of stillness that gave her time to think, to rebuild something within herself that had been broken. She never discovered who had built it or why it had been left behind. Maybe it was meant for someone else, someone who never came. Or maybe it was always meant for her, waiting quietly until the moment she needed it most. What mattered wasn't the answer, but the way it changed her. She had arrived in those hills with nothing but loss and uncertainty. But behind that sealed door, she found more than food. She found a reason to keep going, a reminder that even in the harshest moments, something unexpected can appear and carry you through. For a few seconds after the door opened, she didn't move at all. The darkness inside felt thick, almost physical, like a curtain she wasn't sure she was allowed to pass through. Her heart was beating faster now, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of the unknown. Up until this moment, everything she had faced made sense in a harsh, natural way. Hunger, cold, loneliness. But this was different. A hidden door in the hillside leading into something man-made suggested intention, planning, and a past she knew nothing about. Slowly, she leaned forward, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. At first, she could only make out vague shapes, shadows layered upon shadows. But as her vision sharpened, those shapes began to take form. Lines appeared where there had been blur, and what she saw made her breath catch. The space inside wasn't empty, it was organized. Shelves ran along the walls, sturdy and deliberate, holding objects that were too uniform to be random. This wasn't a cave or a hollowed-out space left by nature. It was a storage room, built and stocked with purpose. She stepped inside cautiously. each footfall slow, almost reverent, as if she were entering a place that demanded respect. The air was noticeably cooler than outside, still and protected, carrying a faint scent of preserved goods, dry grains, sealed containers, something slightly sweet and aged. It felt untouched, like time had paused here while the outside world continued moving. Her eyes moved from one shelf to another, taking in the details. Glass jars lined up neatly, their contents visible even in the low light. Dark shapes that looked like dried fruits, lighter grains packed tightly, and other preserved items she couldn't immediately identify. Cloth sacks rested in corners, tied securely, their shape suggesting they were filled with something substantial. Everything was arranged with care, not thrown together in haste, but placed with intention, as if whoever had built this place expected it to be used when needed. For a moment, disbelief held her still. After days of finding nothing she could trust, nothing she could safely eat, the sight in front of her felt almost overwhelming. It was too much, too sudden. Her mind struggled to accept that this was real, that she hadn't imagined it out of desperation. She reached out slowly toward one of the jars, her hand hovering just above it before finally making contact. The glass was cool and solid beneath her fingers, grounding her in the moment. When she lifted the jar, it had weight to it, a reassuring heaviness that spoke of real substance inside. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned it, trying to see more clearly. The contents looked like preserved fruit, darkened with time but intact. She hesitated again, not out of fear this time, but out of something closer to awe. This wasn't just food, it was survival, carefully stored and waiting. Opening the jar felt like crossing another invisible line. The seal resisted briefly before giving way with a soft sound, releasing a faint scent that immediately made her mouth water. It was subtle but unmistakable, a reminder of nourishment she had been missing for too long. She paused, holding the jar close as if savoring the moment before allowing herself to fully accept it. The first bite was small, cautious. She half expected something to go wrong, for the taste to be spoiled or the food to be inedible. But it wasn't. The flavor, though simple, was rich compared to the emptiness she had been living with. It spread warmth through her, not just physically but emotionally, breaking through the tension that had been building inside her for days. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the reality of it settle in. As she ate a little more carefully, trying not to rush, her mind began to shift. The constant pressure of survival eased just enough to allow something else in: relief. Not complete safety, not certainty about the future, but a pause in the struggle. She looked around the room again, this time seeing it not just as a mystery, but as a resource. There was enough here to last if she was careful, enough to carry her through days, maybe even longer. She replaced the jar gently, already understanding that this place needed to be treated with respect. Taking too much, wasting anything, could undo the opportunity she had been given. Whoever had created this space had done so with care, and she felt an unspoken responsibility to honor that. At first, she thought the hidden room was only about survival, a temporary solution to an immediate problem. Food meant energy, and energy meant she could last another day, then another. But as time passed, something deeper began to take shape inside her, something she hadn't expected when she first stumbled through the hills, exhausted and afraid. The space behind that door did more than keep her alive. It gave her the stillness she needed to begin rebuilding herself. In the beginning, she moved carefully, almost cautiously, as if the discovery might disappear if she wasn't respectful enough. She took only small portions of food, learning to ration instinctively. Each jar she opened, each handful of grain she used, was measured with awareness. She understood that what she had found was limited and that her survival depended on discipline. This sense of responsibility slowly replaced the panic that had driven her before. Instead of reacting to fear, she began making decisions with thought and intention. With her basic needs temporarily secured, her mind finally had room to breathe. The constant noise of hunger and exhaustion faded into the background, and in that quiet, her thoughts returned, not as overwhelming chaos, but as something she could face piece by piece. She began to reflect on everything that had led her there, not with the same intensity of anger or hurt, but with a growing sense of clarity. Distance had changed her perspective. What once felt like an ending now seemed more like a turning point, even if it had come in the harshest way possible. The shelter itself became more than just a place to eat. It became a place to rest properly, to sleep without the constant fear of being exposed to the elements. For the first time since leaving home, she could close her eyes and allow her body to fully relax. That rest began to restore her strength, both physically and mentally. Each morning she woke up with a little more energy, a little more focus, and a slightly stronger sense of control over her situation. Outside, the hills remained as unforgiving as ever, especially as the days grew colder. The wind became sharper, the nights longer, and the signs of winter more obvious. But instead of feeling threatened by the changing season, she began to prepare for it in small, thoughtful ways. She organized the supplies inside the room, making sure everything was accessible and protected. She paid attention to how much she used each day, adjusting her habits to make the food last longer. These actions, though simple, gave her a sense of purpose. She was no longer just surviving, she was planning. That shift in mindset changed everything. Fear had once dictated her actions, pushing her from one moment to the next without direction. Now, she was beginning to shape her own path, even within the limits of her situation. The hidden room had given her the time and stability to think beyond immediate needs. She started noticing details in her environment, learning patterns in the weather, understanding the rhythm of the days. It was as if she was slowly reconnecting with the world around her, but on her own terms. What surprised her most was the feeling that began to grow quietly beneath everything else. Hope. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was steady. It came from the realization that she had endured something incredibly difficult and had found a way through it. She had walked into the hills with nothing but fear and uncertainty, yet somehow she had discovered something that allowed her to continue. That understanding gave her confidence, not in the sense that everything would be easy, but in the belief that she could handle what came next. The mystery of the place remained unsolved. She often wondered who had built it, who had filled it with supplies, and why it had been left hidden for so long. But over time, those questions mattered less. The answers wouldn't change what the place had become for her. It wasn't just a forgotten storage room. It was a lifeline, a second chance that had appeared when she needed it most. As winter finally settled over the hills, cold and relentless, she faced it with a readiness she never could have imagined before. She had shelter, she had food, and most importantly, she had found something within herself that she hadn't known existed. Strength, patience, and the ability to adapt had grown quietly in the background, shaping her into someone different from the girl who had been forced out with nowhere to go.